What if I told you that some of the greatest baseball players of all time, men who shattered records, redefined positions, and rewrote what was humanly possible, never once played in a World Series, never felt the champagne, never heard the October roar, not because they weren't good enough, but because the teams around them never were? This isn't a story about failure. It's a story about brilliance abandoned, about loyalty punished, about the heartbreak of showing up every day, playing like a legend, while your franchise folds around you. From Mike Trout to Tony Gwynn, from Paul Skenes to Ernie Banks, these are the players who gave the game everything and got nothing back but silence. This is the hidden side of greatness, and it's time their stories were told. Imagine you were gifted with the rarest skill set in the world, born to dominate, destined to inspire, and you did. You shattered records, redefined the limits of human performance, and stood alone on the mountaintop of achievement. But no one climbed with you. The stands were empty of postseason banners. The locker room echoed with resignation, not champagne corks. You gave the game everything, and the game gave you back silence. This is not the story of failure. This is the story of brilliance denied its legacy. This is the story of baseball's greatest talents who were left stranded, abandoned by poor management, collapsed rosters, and front office blunders so catastrophic they turned once promising dynasties into gravesites of potential. Our journey begins with a name still fresh on the stat sheets. A rookie already rewriting history, Paul Skenes. A flamethrower with control, charisma, and composure. Skenes didn't just arrive in the majors, he exploded onto the scene in 2024. With a rookie season so dominant, the league didn't even have time to adjust. A 1.96 era, 170 strikeouts, NL Rookie of the Year, third in Cy Young voting, and yet none of it mattered. The Pittsburgh Pirates lost. Again, 76 wins, 86 losses, and the one bright light on their roster was left to burn alone. How does a generational ace start his career with a 1.9 for era and finish the season with a 4-7 record? Simple. His team scored fewer than 4 runs for him in most starts. To put that in perspective, had the Pirates merely provided average league run support just for point for runs per game, Skenes' record could have easily been 28-1. That's not speculation, that's math. But math doesn't win championships, teams do. And Pittsburgh hasn't been a team in the competitive sense for years. Even as Skenes continues to pitch to a microscopic 1.73 era in the first half of 2025, the team is already underwater at 38-56. They've handed this generational arm a 1-5 record in his last 13 starts. It's not just unfair, it's historic malpractice. We are watching in real time what fans decades from now will shake their heads at: a wasted rookie prime, sacrifice on the altar of a rebuild that never finishes rebuilding. But Paul Skenes isn't alone in this purgatory. Baseball, more than any other sport, reveals the cruel contradiction between individual brilliance and team futility. Just ask Ernie Banks. Mr. Cub was more than a nickname, it was a branding of loyalty through suffering. Banks hit 512 home runs, won back-to-back MVPs, and yet never once played in the postseason. His 1958 season alone, in which he slugged 47 home runs with 129 RBIs and a 9.3 WAR, should have guaranteed playoff exposure. Instead, the Cubs finished 72-82, 20 games out. This was not an anomaly, it was a template. From 1953 to 1971, the Cubs recorded just 6 winning seasons. Banks, the man who made shortstop a power position, who redefined what athleticism could look like at that role, who was selected to 11 All-Star teams, was reduced to a footnote in team futility. He was a Ferrari parked in a garage full of go-karts. The team couldn't draft well, couldn't develop pitchers, couldn't keep a manager for more than 2 seasons. And so, Banks' brilliance stayed chained to the inescapable gravity of organizational dysfunction. The same gravity that later pulled down players like Joey Votto, whose disciplined, cerebral approach at the plate turned him into one of the best hitters of his era. But unlike Banks, Votto actually made it to the postseason once. His 2010 MVP season should have been the start of something special. He led the league in on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS. The Reds won 91 games, and then it all collapsed. From 2011 to 2021, the Reds had just 4 winning seasons, and none of those included even a single playoff series win. Votto, meanwhile, kept hitting. A .297 average, 241 home runs, a .409 career OBP top 50 all-time, and still, the fans watched October from home. He was a man ahead of his era, a contact hitter who rarely struck out, a student of the game who treated each at-bat like a chess match. But Cincinnati gave him checkers pieces. His 2017 campaign was the insult that sealed the wild slashing. 324.45 for .578 with 36 homers. He finished second in MVP voting. The Reds went 68-94. Imagine being the best version of yourself year after year while your team does the opposite. That was Joey Votto's career, and it's a script we've seen far too often. The cruel irony of baseball is that it can demand absolute excellence from its players, while rewarding them with nothing if the 9 men behind them fail to keep pace. No one exemplifies that tragedy more hauntingly than Shohei Ohtani. Between 2018 and 2023, Ohtani did the impossible not once, but repeatedly. He was a two-way player in a one-lane league, a slugger with 40 homers and a pitcher with a sub 3.0 era. He was the reincarnation of Babe Ruth with better conditioning and modern training. But what did the Los Angeles Angels do with this once-in-a-century player? Nothing. Not a winning season. Not a playoff berth. Not even a .50 record. They surrounded him with missed draft picks, bullpen implosions, and front office chaos. In 2021, he smashed 46 home runs while posting a 3.18 era. The Angels, 77 wins. In 2022, he followed that up with 30 for bombs and a .33 era. Again, 73 wins. By 2023, the world was running out of adjectives. He led the American League with 40 for homers and went 10-5 on the mound. Los Angeles responded with another 73-89 finish. Ohtani and Trout, arguably the 2 most talented players of the century, were left watching October from the couch. There were totals climbing, their playoff appearances non-existent. The Angels were not a team. They were a talent graveyard with a stadium attached. That's why Ohtani left, and why his $700 million Dodgers deal felt less like a betrayal and more like a long overdue escape. And that's the emotional weight of wasted greatness. It doesn't just kill legacies, it erodes faith. Faith in the game's ability to reward those who give everything. For Ichiro Suzuki, that erosion came slowly. His MLB debut in 2001 was legendary. Rookie of the Year, MVP, 240 to hits, 116 wins for the Seattle Mariners. And then, the drought, 11 years. No playoff returns, no meaningful October moments, just Ichiro, hitting and running and slapping line drives into every gap imaginable. While the Mariners slowly sank, in 2004, he broke the all-time single season hit record 260 to base knocks while batting .372. His team, 63-99. He was the most consistent offensive weapon of his era, leading the league in hits 7 times. But Seattle never gave him a true partner. No ace to mirror his fire. No slugger to draw attention away. No postseason dance to let him shine. Beneath October lights, it's not that Ichiro wasted his prime, it's that the Mariners wasted it for him. This is what separates wasted talent from missed opportunity. These players didn't underperform. They overperformed in spite of disaster. The system failed them. Just ask Felix Hernandez, King Felix. His 2010 Cy Young came with a 2.27 era and 230 to strikeouts and a 13-12 record. That year, the Mariners were 61-101. He pitched like royalty for a team that played like peasants. From 2005 to 2019, Felix won 169 games. The Mariners never gave him a single playoff inning, not one. His peak from 2009 to 2014 was absurd 14 wins a year, era under the .75, and over 225 strikeouts annually. Still, his team averaged just 74 wins in those seasons. Even in 2014, when he led the Allen era and whip, Seattle missed the postseason by one game. A team with just an ounce more competency, one timely trade, one decent bat could have rewritten Hernandez's legacy. Instead, they let their ace rot in the basement of the standings until his arm gave out, and the hope went with it. Think about that. A man who threw a perfect game, a man who struck out over 1,500 batters, a man who never pitched in October. That's not baseball. That's injustice in cleats. And it continues with Mike Trout. Trout is a generational cornerstone, the type of player who breaks the game's algorithm. From 2012 to 2023, he led the league in WAR almost every year, 11 All-Star selections, 7 top 2 MVP finishes, 3 MVP trophies, and just one postseason appearance, a sweep in the ALDS. No hits, no wins, no chance. In 2016, he was the best player in the world. 123 runs scored, 116 walks, a point for 1 OBP, and a 10-point for WAR. The Angels went 70 for 288. The math doesn't even make sense, but that's the math of mismanagement. The Angels failed to draft well, sign smart, or retain depth. They paired Trout with broken rotations and inconsistent lineups. They buried his brilliance under a mountain of mediocrity. Pairing him with Ohtani was supposed to be destiny. Instead, it was deja vu. From 2018 to 2023, even with both superstars, the team averaged just 67 wins. The Angels became the cautionary tale, proof that no matter how transcendent the talent, number player can carry a broken institution. The road to Cooperstown may still await Trout, but the October magic? That ship has sailed so many times it's left waves of regret behind. Now we turn to a player whose entire ethos was elegance, precision, discipline. The kind of hitter who turned at-bats into ballet. Tony Gwynn didn't chase pitches. Pitchers chased him. His career batting average of .338 is the highest of the modern era. He struck out just 434 times in over 10,000 plate appearances, fewer than some players do in 5 seasons. But Gwynn's near-mythic consistency was not rewarded with praise or confetti. It was met with team collapse year after year. The San Diego Padres, despite flashes of competitiveness, failed to surround him with a lasting contender. In 1987, Gwynn batted .370, led the league in hits, and his team went 65 to 97. In 1986, he played Gold Glove defense and hit .329. Padres lost 88 games. In 1994, he was chasing .400, batting .394 with a .45 for OBP when the strike-shortened season ended. The Padres, 12.5 games out. He made 15 All-Star games, won 8 batting titles, stole over 300 bases, and yet San Diego averaged just 60 wins during his most remarkable stretches. Gwynn wasn't just great, he was consistent in a way few players in history could replicate. His ability to put the ball where fielders weren't was like watching someone play chess on a checkers board and still win. But the Padres gave him little to work with, weak pitching rotations, negligible power bats, and a revolving door of mediocrity. So Gwynn's greatness became a quiet tragedy, a masterpiece hung in a basement, still admired, still revered, but unseen by the October crowd. And then there's Steve Carlton, arguably the most extreme case of single-player dominance on a team that could barely keep its shoes tied. In 1972, Carlton won 27 games. The Phillies won 59 total. Do the math, Carlton won nearly half of them himself. The next best pitcher had 7 wins. The rest of the rotation combined, 30 to 287. Carlton's era was 1.97. He threw 30 complete games and struck out 310 batters. This wasn't just a Cy Young season, it was a Herculean feat. The Phillies' offense scored just 3.2 runs per game. Carlton still went 27-10. He didn't just carry the team. He dragged them across the finish line with bloodied cleats and a fire in his arm. And while he would eventually win for Cy Youngs and find team success later in the decade, his 1972 performance remains the pinnacle of wasted effort. He was a one-man war machine deployed in a war already lost. And finally, we land on Zack Greinke, another pitcher who, in 2009, gave everything to a franchise that had nothing. His .116 ERA led the league. His WHIP was 1.073. He struck out to 140 to batters and allowed just 11 home runs across 33 starts. But the Royals, though, the Royals finished 65-97. The bullpen blew his leads. The offense gave him under 2 runs per game in his losses. In 8 of his defeats, his ERA was under 1.90. That's not bad luck. That's a systemic failure. That season, Greinke's WAR was 10.5. The next best Royal, the .7. The chasm wasn't a gap, it was a canyon. He wasn't pitching in the major leagues. He was pitching in the dark, alone, with no rope and no ladder. And what do these stories tell us? They tell us that the scoreboard doesn't always tell the truth, that a win-loss record doesn't always measure worth, that legends can bloom in the shadows. And sometimes the Hall of Fame is the only place where justice catches up. These men weren't just good, they weren't just great, they were transcendent. And yet, their primes were chewed up and swallowed by incompetence. Some got out in time, some didn't. But all of them, every single one, deserved better. Because when you pour your soul into a game that promises glory in exchange for sacrifice, it is a particular cruelty to never taste that glory. These players earned the champagne, the ticker tape, the praise. Instead, they got silence, and that silence echoes still. There's a saying in baseball: you play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the one on the back. But what happens when the name on the front never holds up its end of the bargain? When loyalty is met not with team effort, but with managerial turnover, wasted seasons, and fan indifference? That's the emotional undercurrent tying all these players together, not just that they were great, but that they believed in the organizations that failed them. They didn't bail at the first sign of trouble. They didn't demand trades or bolt in free agency at the peak of their power. They stayed. They hoped. And that hope slowly eroded, season by season, until all that remained was the stat sheet, a list of individual triumphs unaccompanied by team success. Let's revisit Ichiro for a moment. His 11 years post-2001 were filled with highlights, gold gloves, all-star games, hits galore, but not a single playoff run. Why? Because the Mariners' front office couldn't build a roster around him. They miss on pitchers. They miss on sluggers. They drafted poorly and developed worse. And yet Ichiro never stopped running out ground balls like it was Game 7. He never complained. He just kept delivering, and Seattle kept wasting it. There's something almost tragic in that discipline, that commitment to excellence, even when no one's watching. That's what makes wasted greatness so uniquely painful. It's not just about losses. It's about all the games that could have mattered, but didn't. Felix Hernandez embodied that heartbreak. His perfect game in 2012 remains one of the most beautiful pitching performances ever recorded. Yet it happened during another meaningless season. No playoff push, no October waiting, just brilliance in a vacuum. A performance that should have cemented a legacy instead became a trivia question. Which Cy Young winner never made the postseason? The answer is still on the list. And now we come back to Mike Trout, perhaps the most symbolic figure of this entire narrative. He has done everything you can ask from a player. He hits for power, average, gets on base, plays elite defense, leads, stays quiet, shows up early, trains relentlessly. He is the platonic ideal of a franchise player. But the Los Angeles Angels, despite having him under contract for over a decade, could not build even one consistent contender around him. How do you take a player on pace to rival Mays and Mantle and give him one postseason series, which you then lose? The answer lies in years of mismanagement, in overvalued contracts, underdeveloped prospects, chaotic coaching changes, and front office disarray. The Angels were not snake-bitten. They were self-sabotaged, and Trout bore the cost. He should have been the face of October. Instead, he's become the face of what could have been. A man with a Cooperstown resume and barely any playoff footage. For fans of the game, it's not just frustrating, it's heartbreaking. Because you watch these players, and you know they're special. You know they deserve the big stage, the late-inning drama, the champagne-soaked interviews. But they never got them. Not because they failed, but because their teams did. The scoreboard doesn't show that. History books rarely mention it, but it matters. It should matter, because the beauty of baseball is its demand for patience, its reverence for the long game. But for these stars, the long game became a waiting room that never called their name. And still, they stayed. They signed extensions. They remained loyal. Maybe they believed the next season would be different. Maybe they were just too proud to walk away. Either way, they paid a price, the cost of carrying greatness alone. What does it feel like to know you're better than everyone else on the field and still walk away empty-handed, to dominate at your position, put up numbers that redefine the role you play, and realize year after year that your impact dies in September? It's not bitterness these players carry. It's something colder, something more hollow. And few experience that hollowness quite like Joey Votto. Votto wasn't flashy. He wasn't built for headlines or ESPN highlight reels. He was built for nuance, for control. He mastered the art of the strike zone like a surgeon with a scalpel. 7 seasons leading the league in on-base percentage, a 17-year career defined by patience, contact, and quiet confidence. In 2010, he won the NL MVP and led the Reds to a postseason berth, a glimpse of hope. But that moment proved to be the outlier. From 2011 to 2021, the Reds had just 4 winning seasons, not a single playoff series win. And during that time, Votto was still Votto, averaging a .297 batting average and a .409 OBP. He wasn't fading. He was evolving. Even in 2017, when he slashed .324, .454, 578, and finished second in MVP voting, the Reds gave him 68 wins and a last-place finish. It's hard to describe the type of career Votto had because there are so few comparables. He was playing chess while his teammates were playing checkers, and he played chess alone. For over a decade, the Cincinnati front office didn't just fail to build around him. They failed to try. Poor trades, underwhelming draft classes, and a revolving door of mediocrity in the pitching staff turned the Reds from contenders into passengers, and Votto stayed. He believed, or maybe he just accepted it. Either way, the prime years of one of baseball's most cerebral hitters dissolved in a sea of 70-win seasons. He was a lighthouse in the fog, and no ships ever came. If Joey Votto was underappreciated in real time, Tony Gwynn was misunderstood. Gwynn didn't hit home runs. He didn't play in New York or Boston. He played in San Diego, a city known more for sunshine than sports dynasties. But Gwynn was the contact hitter of his generation. 8 batting titles, 15 All-Star games, over 3,000 hits, and still, the Padres only made the playoffs 3 times in his 20-year career, just once in his prime, his 1987 season. He hit .370 with 218 hits. The Padres lost 97 games. In 1994, he was hitting .394 when the strike ended the season prematurely. His window to chase point for 0 feet untouched. Since Ted Williams was slammed shut by labor disputes and a Padres team 12 games under .500, Gwynn wasn't flashy. He was surgical. He didn't explode, he eroded defenses, 1 base hit at a time. He didn't strike out. He didn't swing wildly. He was the purest example of form over flash. But again, San Diego never gave him what he deserved, a lineup to protect him, a rotation to extend leads, a team worthy of his presence. And so, he stood at the plate, season after season, slicing singles through infields that knew it was coming and still couldn't stop it. Gwynn never left, never demanded more, but fans know, they remember, because what he gave the game wasn't just numbers, it was grace, and the game, for all its poetry, didn't give him enough in return. And now we reach the part of the story where talent becomes burden, where greatness becomes a mirror, reflecting back the failures of everything around it. These players weren't just symbols of excellence, they became symbols of misallocation, of front offices that didn't understand the value they had until it was too late. They weren't just surrounded by mediocrity, they were defined by it. And that's the saddest part, because when we look back at the legends, we don't just remember the stats, we remember the moments, the postseason walk-offs, the Game 7 brilliance, the championships, and for these players, so many of those moments never came, not because they didn't earn them, but because their teams didn't believe enough to make them possible. Let's stop pretending that baseball always rewards greatness. It doesn't. Sometimes it forgets it. Sometimes it buries it in last place standings and late season irrelevance. And in the case of Zack Greinke, it nearly erased it altogether. His 2009 Cy Young campaign remains one of the most statistically masterful pitching seasons of the modern era. 2.16 era to 140 to strikeouts and an out-best 1.073 whip. He was unhittable, a master of deception, mixing speeds and locations like a jazz musician improvising a perfect solo. And yet, the Kansas City Royals gave him a 65-97 season. They weren't just bad, they were generationally irrelevant. Greinke lost 8 games that year, and in those 8, the Royals gave him an average of 1.9 runs of support. That's not losing, that's being abandoned. His era in those defeats was under 1.90. He pitched better in his losses than some pitchers do in their no-hitters. It wasn't just about offense, either. The Royals' bullpen often unraveled leads Greinke had carefully carved through 7 or 8 shutout innings. Their team era, excluding Greinke, was for .83. Their defense, mediocre. Their lineup, quiet. It was Greinke against the world, and the world never noticed. And that's the cruel reality. When you're that good on a team, that bad, your excellence becomes background noise, something to admire from afar, but never celebrate in the way it deserves. And yet, Greinke pressed on. He reinvented himself multiple times, relying on location, control, and guile over velocity. He's one of the smartest pitchers ever to step on the mound. But in 2009, during the prime of his ability, he wasn't rewarded. He was left to pitch masterpieces in front of a fan base that knew the outcome didn't matter. And this brings us to a larger truth. The greatest baseball. Players aren't always remembered for what they did, but for where they did it. Derek Jeter's postseason heroics are etched into baseball folklore, not just because he was good, but because his team let him be great on the biggest stage. Compare that to someone like Felix Hernandez who, despite a perfect game, a Cy Young, and over 1,500 strikeouts, has no postseason memory to offer, not because he failed, because his team failed. This is the injustice we rarely talk about. The team game aspect of baseball creates a cruel lottery system where generational talent can be trapped, caged in mediocrity. If you land on the wrong franchise at the wrong time, your legacy becomes a story of what could have been, not what was. Paul Skenes may already be walking that same line, historic dominance for a Pirates team that can't buy a run. Mike Trout lived it for over a decade. Joey Votto endured it in silence, and legends like Banks, Gwynn, Ichiro, they made peace with it, even if we never should. Baseball's history books don't always tell these stories correctly. Wins, losses, championships, these become the shorthand for greatness. But real greatness, it lives in the players who kept fighting when their teams stopped trying, who put up MVP seasons on 90-loss clubs, who didn't just play for stats but played for dignity. And they deserve our attention not because they won but because they should have. There's a unique kind of sadness that creeps in when you realize you're watching history, but only in isolation, no context, no celebration, just numbers floating in a void. For every October hero who gets immortalized in slow-motion montages, there's a forgotten master grinding through July doubleheaders in front of 8,000 fans. And when we talk about wasted talent in Major League Baseball, that sadness isn't just emotional, it's structural. Because for every Steve Carlton dragging a last-place team toward dignity, For every Mike Trout dragging an entire franchise like Atlas with a bat, there are systems behind their front offices, ownership groups, development departments quietly, failing to meet the moment. These aren't isolated stories. They're a pattern of mismanagement, bad timing, and broken pipelines. And that pattern extends far beyond stats. It lives in the body language of post-game interviews, in the way players like Trout or Hernandez or Votto stood in front of cameras after another 6-3 loss and said the right things because there was no one else to say them. It lives in the empty seats during late September games when the season's already over. But the game goes on, and it lives in how history books will record the brilliance of these men without fully capturing the cost. Because the truth is this: baseball punishes loyalty, it punishes humility, it punishes the player who stays. Trout could have demanded a trade in 2016. Votto could have asked out after 2012. Ichiro could have walked sooner. But they didn't, and in staying, they tied their legacies to franchises that never earned them. And it's not just a front office issue, it's cultural. MLB as a whole doesn't reward players who don't play in October. They get less airtime, fewer endorsements, and less spotlight even if they're generational icons. When Tony Gwynn was hitting .394 in 1994, the national conversation still gravitated toward the Yankees, the Braves, the postseason picture. Gwynn was doing something historical, on pace to break a record untouched for over 50 years. And most of America didn't even realize it until the strike wiped it away. That's the cost of playing for a small market team. That's the cost of being great in the wrong zip code. Think about this. Ernie Banks hit 47 home runs in 1958 and posted a 9.3 WAR. His team finished 20 games back in 1959. He followed it with 45 bombs and a league-leading 143 RBIs, and the Cubs still finished with a losing record. From 1953 to 1971, the Cubs had just 6 winning seasons. Banks played 19 years. He didn't leave. He didn't waver. After that, he was given no playoff appearances, not one. And what does that say about the game? About the way it measures value for fans? It's a tough pill to swallow. We know these players. We watched them. We believed in them. But we also saw the standings. We saw the broken bullpens, the errors, the front offices that passed on talent in the draft because it was too expensive. And the tragedy wasn't that these players failed. It's that they were never even given the chance to succeed. Because success in baseball, real, lasting, legacy-defining success, requires a stage. And some of the greatest talents the game has ever seen never got to step on it. Not because they didn't earn it, but because the people around them didn't care enough to build it. That's not just a story. That's an indictment. By now, the pattern should be impossible to ignore. Talent real, generational. Once-in-a-lifetime talent is not enough. Not in baseball. Not in a sport that requires 9 players, a bullpen, a competent manager, a scouting department, and a front office that knows the difference between analytics and wishful thinking. The harsh truth is this: you can be the best player on earth and still finish your career wondering what it would have felt like to play in Game 7. And if that sounds dramatic, consider Mike Trout again. Through age 32, his 86 career WAR put him ahead of where Willie Mays was at the same age. Willie Mays. But while Mays dazzled in World Series appearances, made legendary plays in postseason history, Trout's legacy, at least in terms of playoff impact, is a blank slate. The Angels have made 1 postseason appearance in Trout's career. They were swept. He recorded 1 hit in that series. That's it. That's the full October chapter in the book of Mike Trout. Not because he lacked greatness, but because the system around him never worked. This isn't just bad luck. This is the cumulative result of years of poor decisions. The Angels had the opportunity to build around him. They had high draft picks, big payrolls, and even managed to land Shohei Ohtani, and still, they averaged 67 wins per year from 2018 to 2023. When you have Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani in the same lineup and can't crack .500, it's not the players, it's everything else. And if that doesn't make you question the architecture of modern baseball, nothing will. Because these players aren't just victims of poor timing, they're victims of misallocated resources, of loyalty being mistaken for complacency, of brilliance being acquired to market, of franchises' content to sell jerseys instead of compete. Now imagine what these players could have been if they landed somewhere else. If Trout had been drafted by the Cardinals, if Votto had played for the Giants, if Ichiro had debuted in New York or Boston instead of Seattle. We talk about alternate realities in sci-fi movies, but baseball has them too. In some other timeline, these men are World Series MVPs, parade float legends, cornerstones of dynasties. But in this one, they're cautionary tales, not because of who they were, but because of who they played for. And that realization is the final heartbreak. These were not failed careers. These were unfinished ones. Because baseball, unlike any other sport, doesn't just require you to be great, it requires you to be lucky. Lucky in where you're drafted. Lucky in how your team develops talent. Lucky in how your GM spends money. And luck, it seems, wasn't with many of these men. But greatness was. It always was. And in the end, maybe that's the point. Because even without the rings, the trophies, the champagne, their brilliance shines through in the swing, in the windup, in the way the ball left the bat or died at the knees. And that brilliance, however wasted by their teams, was never wasted by us. We saw it, we remember it, and we'll keep telling these stories long after the standings have faded from memory. So what do we do with all this, with the names, the numbers, the highlight reels drenched in what if? Do we mourn what never happened or celebrate what still did? Because if there's one thing these stories teach us, it's that legacy isn't only written in rings, it's written in consistency, in showing up to a losing clubhouse day after day and still giving your best, in never lowering your standard, even when your team's standards have hit the floor, in staying not because you have to, but because you believe you should. Joey Votto didn't win a championship, but he left the game with a point for 09 OBP and the respect of every pitcher he ever faced. Tony Gwynn didn't break point for 00, but he got closer than anyone in half a century and did it without ever compromising his game. Felix Hernandez never threw a postseason pitch, but he threw a perfect game for a team that didn't even matter in the standings. And he did it like the king he was. Ernie Banks never saw October, but he brought joy to Wrigley through decades of mediocrity. Let's play to, he'd say even when the Cubs had lost 10 straight. That's not just optimism, that's grace. And what about Ichiro? He showed us that baseball didn't have to be loud to be brilliant, that a single could feel like a thunderclap. That footwork and bat control were as worthy of admiration as towering home runs. He turned hits into art, and the league should have given him a gallery. These men weren't just athletes, they were craftspeople. They worked at their game with devotion. They honored the sport even when the sport didn't honor them back. And maybe that's what makes them the most heroic of all. Because it's easy to give your best when your team is winning, the cameras are flashing, and the confetti is falling. It's much harder to do it in silence, in obscurity, in front of 12,000 fans on a Tuesday in July when your team is 20 games under .500, you know, the season is already lost. But they did it anyway. That's the kind of excellence that transcends standings, the kind that echoes after the final pitch has been thrown. It teaches us something bigger than baseball. It teaches us that sometimes greatness isn't about reward. It's about refusal to quit, refusal to settle, refusal to give less just because the world around you isn't giving more. These players didn't get their storybook ending, but they still wrote unforgettable chapters. And the next time someone tries to define greatness only by postseason success, remind them there are legends whose legacies were forged not in October glory, but in August irrelevance, in batting cages at midnight, in strikeouts with no run, support, in years when they gave everything and got nothing in return but the quiet pride of knowing they never stopped being great. There's something hauntingly beautiful about devotion that goes unrewarded, something noble in the idea that you can give your all, even when you know the world might not notice. In a sport obsessed with rings and banners and postseason lore, These players quietly reminded us that greatness doesn't always look like champagne-soaked jerseys. Sometimes, it looks like a man jogging out of the dugout after his 100th loss that year and still diving for a ball like it matters. Sometimes, it's a batter walking away from another 2-4 for night with no RB is because his team's stranded. 12 runners, and he doesn't flinch, just prepares for tomorrow. That quiet commitment, that invisible excellence is what separates these athletes from everyone else. It's not just that they were great, it's that they refused to be anything less, even when there was no glory waiting for them. That's the thread tying all these careers together. They didn't play for the moment. They played for the game. They played because every at-bat was sacred. Every pitch a chance to master something deeper. They weren't chasing the spotlight. They were chasing the limit of what they could become. And maybe that's why their stories matter even more. Because they prove something we rarely talk about in sports. That greatness can exist without winning. Not in a moralizing way, but in a visceral, statistical, unarguable way. Look at the WAR. Look at the OBP, the ERA plus, the walk-to-strikeout ratios. These weren't good players stuck on bad teams. These were elite players carrying teams that didn't deserve them. And still, they carried them anyway, for seasons, for decades. They fought the losing battles, not because they thought they'd win them, but because it was right to fight. And that kind of character, that kind of fire, it doesn't show up in ring counts, but it does show up in memory. It shows up every time a kid mimics Ichiro's swing, or a high school pitcher stares down a batter and thinks of King Felix. It lives in Reds fans who wear Votto jerseys not because of what he won, but because of how he never gave up. It lives in Angels fans who understand Trout didn't fail them, the front office did, and in Cubs fans who never saw Banks play live, but still say let's play with reverence. These players left a legacy the league didn't always reward, but one the fans never forgot. And maybe that's the real win. Not the parade, not the confetti, but the respect, the love, the memory that, for all its failure, this sport still allowed these men to do something sacred, to be excellent, when no one asked them to be, when no one cheered, when no one cared. And that kind of excellence, it never really disappears. It just gets passed down, one quiet swing at a time. As we near the end of this story, it's worth asking, what do we mean when we talk about a wasted career? Is it a player who never won a championship, one who never made the playoffs? Or is it something more nuanced, more personal? Because if the standard is rings alone, then entire generations of brilliance get written off. Carlton Fisk only played in one World Series. Ken Griffey Jr. never reached the Fall Classic. Ted Williams, he never won one, but no one would dare call those careers a waste. Because we felt them, we saw the swings, the fire, the impossible. Catches we knew, and that's the final injustice of the phrase wasted talent. It implies that value can only be found in outcome, that the process doesn't matter, that the work, the years, the effort, all of it means less without a shiny trophy to justify it. But that logic is flawed. It's transactional, and these men weren't in it for the transaction. They were in it for the transcendence, for the moment when the bat connects, when the pitch cuts just right, when a crowd erupts even if that crowd is small and the standings don't matter. They were in it for the craft, and craftspeople don't think about the reward. They think about the next repetition. That's what made Tony Gwynn swing eternal. What made Ernie Banks smile through 90 lost seasons? What made Felix Hernandez throw his heart out in August games no one watched? What made Mike Trout keep swinging even when October never came? What made Ichiro train in shadows and still come out shining? What made Votto speak in soft interviews about plate discipline while carrying an entire franchise's dignity on his back? What made Paul Skenes, even now, in just his second season, carry the hope of a city not because they deserve it but because he does? These men were not wasted. They were monuments in the middle of forgettable landscapes, stars that shone even when no one was looking. They didn't ask for easier teams. They just gave harder effort. And in doing so, they gave baseball fans a truth most sports won't admit, that it's possible to lose every year. and still leave behind a masterpiece, because mastery isn't about context. It's about commitment. It's about showing up, game after game, year after year, and daring to be great anyway. And that above all is why these players still matter, not because of the rings they didn't win, but because of the reverence they earned from everyone who understood the difference between talent and greatness. So we arrive here at the place where numbers fade and legacy begins. Not the kind of legacy measured in championships or postseason highlight reels, but the kind measured in reverence, in respect, in awe, the kind that lives not in what was won, but in how the game was played. It's easy to crown champions, to count rings, to stack banners, but it's much harder to measure the quiet influence of players who never saw October, yet redefined what baseball excellence looked like, who never needed a title to earn our admiration. That's what makes their stories so vital, because they ask something of us as fans. They ask us to see beyond the trophy, to look deeper than the standings, to care not just about who won, but how they played. And that is where true baseball storytelling lies, not in the final box score, but in the fight that came before it, in the patience of Votto staring down 12 pitch at-bats, in the grace of Ichiro laying out a single, in the precision of Gwynn manipulating gaps like a magician, in the unbreakable resolve of Hernandez pitching gems in the silence, in the thunder of Skenes, too young to be this good, already being asked to carry a franchise. In Trout the modern Mays spending 14 years chasing ghosts that his team couldn't summon. And in Ernie Banks, who despite never playing in a single playoff game, showed up every day with joy, with faith, with love for the game. Let's play to, not because it made sense, but because that's what the greats do. They keep going, even when no one else would, even when the system fails them, even when the scoreboard lies. These were not wasted talents. They were witnessed talents, and the act of witnessing, of remembering, keeps them alive. Long after the cleats are hung up, long after the final stats are printed, these men gave us more than wins. They gave us a reason to believe in the soul of the game itself, and for that, they deserve more than a trophy. They deserve our thanks. In a world that obsesses over finish lines, we often forget to honor the runners who never stopped sprinting, even when there was no medal waiting at the end. But maybe those are the athletes who deserve our respect the most. The ones who carried their teams on backs bent by effort, who wore defeat like armor, who brought excellence into hopeless situations simply because that's who they were. These men, Trout, Votto, Ichiro, Gwynn, Hernandez, Banks, Carlton, Greinke, Skenes, they didn't win because their teams couldn't, but they never stopped playing like champions. And that's the truth baseball tries so hard to ignore, that talent can be wasted by a circumstance. But greatness never is. Greatness leaves marks, not just on record books, but on hearts. It teaches, it inspires, it echoes. These players taught us that there's more to baseball than rings, that loyalty matters, that consistency in the face of chaos is worth more than gold, that you don't need a parade to be a legend. You just need to show up every day, every inning, every pitch with integrity, and that's what they did, and that's why we remember them, not for what they lacked, but for what they gave. So the next time someone says, he never won a title, ask them what that really means. Ask them who stood taller, the player with the ring who rode a loaded roster to the finish line, or the one who stood alone every season, still swinging, still pitching, still showing us how beautiful the game can be even when it breaks your heart. Because in the end, the ones who never gave up gave us more than championships ever could. They gave us the soul of baseball. Baseball doesn't always reward its best, but those who played brilliantly through failure, who kept showing up, kept believing, kept leading, they are the soul of the game. Their greatness wasn't wasted. It was witnessed, and it endures.